In the darkness before dawn, the crew are frantic and terrified. Their lifeboat is stuck and the ship capsizes, plunging 34 men into the frigid waters of the Atlantic Ocean. In May 1944, Sun Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Company in Chester, Pennsylvania, constructed a T2 SEA-1 tanker named SS Musgrove Mills. During World War II, these tankers were vital for supplying fuel to Allied forces, supporting naval operations, and ensuring continuous transportation of essential resources. 3 years after the tanker was constructed and the war ended, the vessel was sold to the Gulf Oil Corporation. It was renamed SS Gulf Mills and used in civilian oil trade. In May 1961, the vessel was sold to Marine Transport Lines Corporation. The ship was once again renamed as SS Marine Electric, and it underwent a significant modification. A new mid-body for the ship was constructed in Bremen, Germany, and integrated within the existing bow and stern. These modifications to the SS Marine Electric increased its overall length by 25 meters and its weight by 15%, enabling it to carry a capacity of just under 26,000 tons. The vessel's cargo hold bilge system's original design used rose boxes to filter water, but some parts were removed and safety valves were missing in some areas. A rose box is like a filter at the bottom of a ship's cargo hold. It lets water and small debris flow into the drainage system while blocking bigger pieces so that the bilge pump can remove water without getting clogged. It keeps the cargo hold dry and the drainage system working smoothly. When the modifications were made for the ship to enter the coal trade, rose boxes were replaced by solid plates. The ship was also fitted with McGregor hatch covers, which makes it easier to open and close the cargo hatches. These single pull cover designs used quick-acting dogs, wedges, and hydraulic jacks to secure and open the panels. Dogs are locking devices that secure the hatch in place. By tightening these dogs around the hatch rim, they create a watertight seal, preventing water from entering the hold during rough sea conditions. In 1961, the hatch covers were approved by the American Bureau of Shipping, but the standards were based on hatch dogs from a previous era. These hatch dogs were not built to stand up to the weight of modern hatches on large ships. The standards were based on smaller ships and not the weight of modern hatches on large ships. The next year, after its conversion from fuel tanker to bulk carrier, the ship's ownership was transferred to the Marine Coal Transport Corporation. The ship then resumed sailing and transporting coal, but over time, the vessel's hatch covers and deck suffered extensive wear and tear. Crew members relied on manual tools like chain blocks and pullers to operate warped and deteriorated hatch covers. The crew also used makeshift materials like tape and tar to weatherproof misaligned hatch panels. Routine maintenance of critical systems couldn't prevent the deterioration of ballast lines, vents, and bilge systems, while thin plating was only patched with epoxy or doublers instead of being properly repaired, and a crack between hatches 3 and 4 was ignored and left unrepaired. In 1981, the ship started carrying coal for the New England Power Company to Brayton Point, Massachusetts, and sometimes it also carried grain in the summer and made trips to Israel. In February 1981, Marine Electric completed its mandatory dry dock, and 4 months later, the US Coast Guard issued a certificate of inspection to certify that the ship was safe, operational, and environmentally compliant. Not a month after that, Marine Electric ran aground near Brayton Point. Divers found no damage, but the American Bureau of Shipping required a check during the next dry dock. In February 1982, an experienced surveyor conducted an inspection and issued Marine Electric with a load line certificate without any deficiencies, despite evidence of substandard maintenance, which violated international load line regulations. The chief mate and third mate raised concerns about the deteriorating condition of the vessel with the ship's owners, but they didn't report their concerns to the Coast Guard or the American Bureau of Shipping because they were worried they might lose their jobs in a time when A culture of underreporting was nothing out of the ordinary. Marine Electric's deteriorating and aged condition meant it was unsafe to continue working, and the owners needed more time to complete essential repairs and maintenance. So they asked for a dry dock extension for 3 months in early 1983. The request was approved by the US Coast Guard. This extension allowed Marine Electric to come into dry dock 3 months later than planned, but then it would have more time in dry dock. During this time, Captain George Call temporarily relieved Captain James Farnham, the vessel's permanent master at Brayton Point. During their handover, Captain Farnham tells Captain Call that all navigation gear except the course recorder works well and the long-range navigation set is accurate to 0.2 miles. In the afternoon on the 10th of February 1983, Marine Electric docks at Virginia for cargo loading, unloading, and ballasting procedures. Later that night, there's a leak between ballast tanks 3 and 4 on the starboard side. The third mate says the readings vary each time they check, and that the ballast tanks were emptied and dry when the ship left from their last port of call. The coal loading operations are complete by 2300, during which a winter storm has been underway. Before sailing, the chief mate evaluates the weather report, which warns of gale force winds between 25 and 35 knots. He's not worried because the ship has sailed in similar weather many times before. Just before midnight, the pilot and docking master are on board as Marine Electric departs for Brayton Point with the help of the tugs while the storm builds. Northeast winds of 55 knots are blowing, and the sea builds from 1 meter in the Chesapeake Bay to 12 meters in the ocean. Early the next morning on the 11th of February, the Weather Service's forecast is 34 to 40 knots, with force 8 seas from the northeast, where wave heights reach almost 8 meters. By dawn, the wind increases to 50 knots and force 10 seas, with breaking waves between 9 and 12 meters. The ship arrives at the pilot station at the mouth of the bay, and the chief mate watches the pilot get off safely. After the pilot disembarks, the crew don't inspect the foredeck or hatch covers, and no soundings are taken off the cargo hold or other spaces to check for any water buildup. The chief mate notices that there are about 15 dogs on the front and back edges of each hatch cover and 20 dogs on each side, but only about half of these dogs are functional enough to secure the hatch covers. Between 0700 and 0900, the third mate relieves the chief mate from his watch without any unusual reports, despite the vessel pitching in heavy northeasterly sea, while Captain Call heads to the bridge to slow the vessel's speed because of the weather conditions. At 1600, Marine Electric sees the fishing vessel Theodora, which is taking on water, and asks the Coast Guard for help. Marine Electric joins the radio call and gives its position of about 95 miles from the mouth of the bay. It stays with Theodora heading west to Chincoteague, Virginia. At 1822, Marine Electric tells the Coast Guard that they might not be able to keep the course and they are heading into trouble. 2 minutes later, the Coast Guard releases Marine Electric from standing by the Theodora to resume its original course to Massachusetts. During the third mate's 2000 to 2400 watch, Captain Call is resting but asks for updates every half hour. The ship moves slowly, covering under 2 miles in 4 hours. The third mate watches the rough seas as 8-meter waves crash over the deck, reaching as far as hatch number 4. The ship rolls heavily, tilting 10 to 15 degrees from left to right. An able-bodied seaman starts his midnight to 0400 watch and notices that the bow no longer rises with the waves, but pushes through them. Waves crash over the bow, spraying icy mist. The ship holds a steady course, but something feels off. Without functional dogs to seal the hatches properly, the hatch covers are not watertight and seawater easily gets into number 1 and 2 forward hatches. Because the rose boxes were removed and replaced by solid plates, the bilge system can't expel water from the cargo holds. By midnight on the 12th of February, Marine Electric's bow is sitting lower in the water than the stern, making it harder to steer or balance. By 0115, the bow's movements become sluggish and the crew grows uneasy as communication with the engine room fails. At 0200, Captain Call summons the chief mate to the bridge, saying they're in trouble and that the vessel is settling by the head. Less than an hour later, Captain Call contacts the Coast Guard, reporting flooding and requesting immediate assistance. The captain's mayday says that they don't know exactly what their situation is. At 0300, the crew follows the captain's instructions and gathers at the starboard lifeboat. They prepare the lifeboat by removing covers and readying life rings, hoping this is merely a precaution that the ship will hold until help arrives. Launching the lifeboats is difficult because there's no winch, so several crew members try to lower them by hand. Just 10 minutes later, Marine Electric's distress calls become more urgent, prompting the Coast Guard to launch a helicopter and redirect a search and rescue vessel. The helicopter launch is delayed because pumps need to be removed from the ready helicopter. A nearby tanker, Tropic Sun, responds to the distress call, but it's hours away. Shortly before 0400, the captain says that he's going to lose his ship. The list worsens from 15 to 20 degrees, and the captain orders that the engines be shut down. The third mate makes a quick blast on the ship's whistle for abandoned ship before leaving the bridge. The general alarm is never sounded. At 0414, before the crew can launch the lifeboats, Marine Electric capsizes, throwing all 34 crew members into the frigid North Atlantic waters. The crew fights to stay afloat in the icy waves, clinging to debris and each other for survival. The Coast Guard dispatches additional assets. A Navy helicopter from Virginia joins the mission. Navy ships USS Jack Williams and USS Seattle, which are 70 miles away, divert course towards the sinking ship. The Coast Guard cutter Point Highland, a 25-meter search and rescue vessel, plays a critical role. At 0520, the Coast Guard's helicopter and vessel CG-1471 arrive at the scene. The Chief of Search and Rescue, Captain Blackett, assesses the tragedy, realizing the crew are scattered in the water amidst gale force weather, making the rescue far more complicated. Soon, a C-130 aircraft takes command of the scene, guiding the arriving vessels Tropic Sun and Berginger as they join the search. 2 hours after Marine Electric capsizes, a Navy helicopter 737 arrives at the scene of the disaster with a rescue swimmer to assist the recovery operations. The Coast Guard calculates a drift line based on wind and currents to work out which direction and how far the crew might have drifted. The drift line leads the rescuers to a concentration of crew from the ship. At 0616, another Coast Guard helicopter, CG-1434, hoists 2 bodies from the water. By 0700, the Point Highland discovers more bodies floating in a half-mile radius. The Coast Guard helicopter recovers the able-bodied seaman, the third mate, and the chief mate. They're covered in the ship's fuel and are in poor condition. They're transported to Peninsula General Hospital in Maryland. Around the same time, the survivors are transported away from the scene, and 5 hours after Marine Electric capsizes, the Coast Guard cutter Cherokee assumes command of the operations and soon locates the vessel's overturned hull. The wreck is partially submerged down at the bow with part of the propeller visible. At 11:30 on the 12th of February 1983, Marine Electric sinks beneath the waves, its final resting place 36 meters below the waterline. The search continues throughout the day, and at 15:10 they find the sunken wreck, but sonar detects no signs of life inside. At 15:50, merchant vessels that participate in the rescue are released, and the Cherokee recovers Marine Electric's number 2 lifeboat. The Navy ships depart at 17:41, leaving the Coast Guard vessels to conduct a night search. By the end of the day, they found 24 more bodies. Many of the bodies are heavily coated in bunker oil. By dawn the next day on the 13th of February, helicopter CG-1434 confirms that debris remains within a 1 to 2 mile drift radius. The search for additional bodies continues, but no further survivors are found. The Point Highland is low on fuel, so they head back to base. By dusk the same day, the active search is suspended. 3 days later, divers investigate the wreck but find no signs of life, and the search officially ends. The able-bodied seaman, the third mate, and the chief mate were the only 3 out of Marine Electric's crew of 34 who survived. They were treated for hypothermia and shock and released from the hospital a few days after the disaster. Of the 24 bodies recovered, it was found that 20 succumbed to hypothermia and drowning, while 4 drowned outright. 7 remain lost, including Captain Call. If you enjoyed this video, then you might like this video about another ship lost at sea.